Imagine this. It's late November 1944. The Pacific War is raging, and Japan's empire, once feared across Asia, is collapsing from all sides. American fleets push forward, island after island. Submarines choke Japan's trade routes. Bombers burn factories and cities. The empire's admirals are desperate. They need a miracle, some secret weapon to restore hope. That miracle, they believe, has just left the shipyard. A ship so huge, so heavily armored, so advanced that they think it might change the course of the war. That ship is Shinano. Born from the unfinished hull of a Yamato-class battleship, Shinano was unlike anything the world had ever seen. At over 70,000 tons, she was more than twice the size of America's Essex-class carriers. Her armored deck was designed to shrug off bombs. Her hangars were cavernous, able to carry up to 150 aircraft. To Japan's admirals, Shinano was more than a ship. She was pride, power, and promise. But history would deal a cruel blow, because Shinano didn't survive even a single day at sea. On her maiden voyage, before she ever launched a plane in anger, she sank beneath the waves, destroyed by a handful of torpedoes from a lone American submarine. For the Japanese High Command, it was a shock so complete that some refused to believe the first reports. How could the largest carrier in history vanish overnight? To understand how this tragedy unfolded, you have to look back at the war Japan had been fighting. In 1941 and early 1942, Japan's carriers seemed unstoppable. They struck Pearl Harbor. They ranged across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. They gave Japan its rapid expansion. But everything changed at Midway. 4 carriers destroyed in a single battle, along with many of Japan's best pilots. That loss crippled Japan's naval air power and handed momentum to the United States. From that moment on, the Imperial Navy was on the defensive. It tried to rebuild, but resources were short and training suffered. America, meanwhile, was launching carriers one after another. By 1944, the imbalance was overwhelming, so Japanese planners turned to an unfinished battleship hull laid down years earlier. Instead of completing it as a gun platform, they decided to convert it into an aircraft carrier. This would be no ordinary conversion. This would be the biggest carrier the world had ever seen. They named her Shinano. Her statistics were staggering: 72,000 tons, a flight deck thicker and stronger than any before, a hull built to battleship standards. In theory, she could withstand bombs that would rip smaller carriers apart. She was meant to be the answer to American naval superiority, a symbol that Japan still had power to project.
But the reality behind Shinano's creation was far less glorious. By 1944, Japan's industrial base was crumbling. Allied bombing raids slowed production. Raw materials were scarce. Experienced workers were gone. Engineers cut corners wherever they could. More importantly, Japan no longer had the pilots to fill her hangars or the fuel to keep her operational. Shinano was a giant without claws. And still, the admirals rushed her to sea. They were afraid American bombers might destroy her in the shipyard before she was finished. So the order came: sail her to another base even though she wasn't ready. Watertight doors were missing. Damage control systems incomplete. Pumps not fully tested. The crew, over 1,000 men, many of them green recruits, had barely any training on how to run a ship this size. It was like sending a brand new sports car onto the highway without brakes, without insurance, and with a driver who just got his license. But in the desperate atmosphere of 1944, the order was obeyed. On November 28th, Shinano slipped out of Yokosuka Naval Base under heavy secrecy. Escorted by 4 destroyers, she headed south along Japan's coast toward Korea. The officers on board felt confident. Who would dare attack such a massive ship so close to the Japanese homeland? But fate had placed a hunter in her path. Lurking off Tokyo Bay was the USS Archerfish, an American submarine commanded by Joseph Enright. Enright had been patrolling for days without success. Then, through his periscope, he saw something enormous, moving slowly across the horizon. At first, he thought it was just a large carrier. The longer he watched, the more he realized this was no ordinary target. This was something unprecedented. He didn't know it was Shinano, the secret pride of the Japanese Navy, but he knew it was worth the risk. Archerfish began to shadow the giant. For hours, the submarine trailed silently in the darkness, matching Shinano's course. The Japanese destroyers never detected it. Inside Archerfish, tension mounted. This was the chance of a lifetime. Shortly after midnight, Enright ordered his attack. 6 torpedoes sped through the water toward the unsuspecting carrier. Seconds ticked by. Then came 4 thunderous impacts. Explosions ripped into Shinano's side. The giant shuddered. Compartments buckled. Water rushed in. But at first, officers aboard thought she would survive. She was so big, so heavily armored. Surely she could absorb a few hits. But then the flaws began to show. Pumps couldn't keep up with the flooding. Watertight doors were missing or improperly sealed. Inexperienced crew members panicked and failed to contain the damage. Instead of isolating compartments, water spread freely. The ship began to list. Admirals on board ordered her to head for shore, to beach the carrier before she went under. The engines roared to life, pushing the wounded vessel forward, but the increased speed forced even more water into her breached hull. The more they tried to save her, the faster she sank. Hour by hour, the situation worsened. By dawn, Shinano was leaning heavily, her decks awash. Efforts to pump out the flooding failed. Destroyers tried to assist, but there was little they could do. Just after 10 in the morning, less than 12 hours after leaving port, Shinano rolled onto her side and slipped beneath the sea. The largest aircraft carrier ever built was gone, sunk on her very first voyage without ever launching a single operational plane. Of the 1,400 men aboard, over 1,000 survived, thanks to rescue by her escorts, but more than 500 sailors perished. When the news reached Japan's naval command, disbelief was the first reaction. Some refused to accept it until confirmations arrived. How could the pride of the fleet, their so-called unsinkable fortress, be destroyed by one submarine? But the truth was undeniable. Shinano was lost. For Japan, the shock was devastating. The Navy had gambled on size and secrecy. They believed an unfinished but massive carrier could sail safely. Instead, their pride had become a humiliating disaster. For the Americans, it was a stunning victory. Commander Enright and his crew returned to base as heroes. They had sunk the largest warship ever to put to sea. Looking back, could Shinano have changed the war if she had survived? Probably not. By late 1944, Japan's carrier air groups were shattered. They lacked aircraft, fuel, and above all, trained pilots. Shinano might have been the biggest ship afloat, but she would have been a giant with no sword. Her loss was dramatic, but her survival would likely not have altered Japan's fate. And yet the lessons of her sinking remain powerful. Size does not equal invincibility. A warship is only as strong as its crew, its training, and its readiness. Rushing a project out of desperation is a recipe for disaster. Shinano sailed unfinished, undertrained, and unready, and she paid the price. Today, Japan operates modern carriers like the Izumo-class. They're advanced, flexible, and designed with lessons of the past in mind. But the ghost of Shinano still lingers, a reminder of what happens when pride overtakes preparation. In the end, Shinano's story is tragic. She was built to restore glory, to prove Japan still had strength, but instead, she became a symbol of decline. Admirals who had placed their faith in her were left stunned, their hopes swallowed by the sea. And for the crew of the USS Archerfish that night, turned a routine patrol into legend. History remembers Shinano not as a mighty warrior, but as a giant brought low before she ever truly lived. So when you hear about invincible machines of war, remember her fate. Remember the carrier that never fought, the pride that turned to shock, the giant that vanished beneath the waves before its time.